everybody. We are very happy to present this paper at this ECER conference in Geneva. It's a virtual presentation, as you know, and I would just like to introduce the title and us as speakers. Behind the Swiss model of vocational education and training, the evolution of a multifaceted system based on cantonal differences. My name is Phillipp Gonon, and I'm at the Institute of Education in Zurich at the Chair for Vocational Education and Training.
Yeah. Hello, thank you, Philip. I am Lorenzo Bonoli and work in the Swiss Federal Institute for Vocational Education and Training, and we are share this presentation. And I give now the floor to Philip. I will intervene later.
Okay. Yeah, Switzerland, the evolution of a distinctive system in the field of vocational education. Why is this of interest, internationally of interest? Reforming vocational education and training systems are very crucial, also in Switzerland, but also in other countries. Why is it like this? And what happens in Switzerland? These are the things we are trying to explain in our further considerations. The merging of vocational and educational by creating a clear-cut format and a code within the educational system. That's what happened in the last years. A historical and a comparative perspective within Switzerland reveals these decisive factors of a well-ordered education system, and VET, Vocational Education and Training, is part of this educational system. We also refer to a well-known Enlightenment person, Julien de Paris, who is meant as one or treated like a founder of the comparative educational approach, and his approach was mainly based in his study on the Swiss cantons, and we do this the same now for the vocational education and training in the following considerations. The Swiss education system, here a very brief overview, seems to be quite a clear-cut model. You see on the one hand, for example, the general baccalaureate and general qualification leading with an academic track to universities or polytechnics. And on the other hand, you have the dual vocational system or the school-based vocational system, which also opens up a lot of further possibilities for the tertiary sector, for the higher education, either with a federal vocational baccalaureate to the universities of applied sciences, or with included a practical work phase to some higher degrees in professional vocational education and training. This model looks very simple, but we will show you in the following that there are more different elements, and it was historically built. What is different, for example, is the share of apprentices in every canton. We have here quite a topical, actual version, and you can see the blue column. These are the apprentices, for example, in the Canton of Appenzell, in the eastern part of Switzerland. And you see a percentage, if you compare this with Geneva on the other end, with a very low share of apprentices in the Canton of Geneva. Appenzell is more a rural canton, Geneva a more urban canton. But it is not just simple like this. You can see that there are some cantons like Bern, Zurich, which also have high shares of apprentices. On the other hand, you have the baccalaureate schools and the general schools, upper secondary special schools as well, which are only school-based and which have also very different shares. If you compare Appenzell again with Geneva, there is, on the other hand, a very big difference. You have also a third element, which is the full-time vocational education and training school element. There are also, and mainly in the western part of Switzerland, in the western cantons, there are vocational education and training programs which are only or full based on schools. Thus, you have a very also differentiated picture if you look today at the Swiss system. We have here also signed the average in the Swiss average for the apprentices, the Swiss average for the baccalaureate schools, and also for the full-time vocational schools. We have also compiled different numbers of different cantons from the beginning, so to say, to today, how the apprenticeship rate was developing during the last century and even till today. And you can see the red line. This is the Swiss average. There is a rising number of youngsters who are joining an apprenticeship. And there are, if you see, especially coming up from the 50s, differences between different cantons. Geneva, for example, as it was shown, has a lower number of apprentices. Meanwhile, Zurich, another canton, has even above the Swiss average a share of apprentices. So there are different cantons, and we did this picture for all cantons, but here we have a selection of 8 cantons, rural cantons, but also other cantons, which show how these differences have been developed during the last decades. In the following, we will focus mainly on 3 cantons, which are also 3 different language regions. Zurich on the one hand, Ticino on the other hand, Italian speaking, and Geneva, French speaking. And we also have here in this slide, you see the Swiss average, the Swiss development of apprenticeships as it was shown before, and Zurich even higher, and Geneva lower, Ticino also a bit lower. These are the cases we will have a closer look. We can also divide 3 phases in the development of dual apprenticeship. The first is very closely linked to the slow starting industrialization and urban and rural variation. And it was also a bit fixed by the first federal law on a national level in the 30s, 1930, the first federal law. We, in our project, I will explain this further, we discern a pivotal period, and these are the 50s to the 70s. In these phases, the numbers rise in one canton and in the other they decline. And so that policies also of interest up from the 70s to today with further federal laws. There was a second one in 63, a third in 78, and the last one in 2002. Yeah, the approach of this paper is multi-dimensional, so to say. We look at economic, educational, social, and political factors, and we have also some papers we can, this paper is based on, or which have some links to. That is, on the one hand, the history of the Swiss education and vocational education and training, Krible, Bonoli and Eigenmann and myself, also historical institutionalism, Busemeyer, Trampusch, Kathleen Thelen. We have also a methodological approach, which is close to others, which is based on a historical reconstruction, which means that we have archives research included, and also, as it was just showed, a description or depiction of some figures, socioeconomic and political framework with a focus on the 50s to the 70s. Identification of the most important differences between the cantons based on these data. That was the one thing we just tried to explain. We also focus on a discourse analysis, which means that we identify the positions and arguments of in the public debate or in the debate around the lawmaking debates, the development of different cantonal policies. And as I said before, we also try to include a comparative approach based on other studies or on other papers, which are perhaps also known, Pilz and Lee, a new one, and also David Rafe with his article on home internationals, where he compares Scotland, Wales, and England and Ireland, so small pieces inside the UK, but also Paul Ryan. So 3 cantons in our paper are some kind of pars pro toto. We try to explain the differences mainly through the lens, through these 3 cantons.
Okay. So thank you, Philip. Now our main findings, the main findings of our research. As Philip pointed out, Switzerland experienced a very pivotal period between the 50s and the 70s. And during this period, Switzerland underwent an economic boom and very important social changes. The Swiss education system was under great pressure to adapt to this new socioeconomic condition. And if we focus on VET, we can identify 3 major challenges that concern it and push it to reforms. And these challenges are, first of all, a high demand for skilled labor. VET had to relaunch the attractiveness of VET that was endangered by the academic education on the one hand, and on the other hand, by the facility of finding a job even without a upper secondary diploma. The second challenge was an increasing complexity of qualification. The expectation of workers' knowledge and skills were increasing, and the discourse at that time spoke of the intellectualization of professions. These expressions refer to the necessity for all kinds of occupation to receive more theoretical and general knowledge. And at the same time, we also find the desire of VET not only to train workers, but also citizens. And this was already there since the beginning of the 19th century. It is renewed in our period. And the third challenge that imposed itself a little bit later for the 60s on is a widespread social demand for better equality and more social justice. We are in this period, we are really in the period of the democratization of education, and this movement called for egalitarian access to upper secondary programs and for measure to compensate for geographical or financial inequalities. And so our 3 cantons address these 3 challenges in different ways. Although VET has been regulated by a federal law since 1930, the federal legal framework has always left a certain amount of room of maneuver, which the cantons have been able to exploit to develop specific cantonal policies. And these cantonal policies are decisive for us to explain the evolution of the apprenticeship and to explain the differences we showed previously. Our working hypothesis is that if in the first phase up to the 50s, the industrial development was decisive to explain the differences between the cantons, from the 50s on, these different cantonal policies are main factors that can explain the differences between the cantons. In order to show the importance of the answer to this challenge, we just establish a kind of model, and this model show how the three challenges influenced the cantonal policies. And this model show also 5 dimensions of differentiation between the cantonal policy. That is 5 issues where significant differences can be underlined in the cantonal policies. And these 5 dimensions of differentiation are the role of the state, the role of VT school, the role of private actors, the range of equal opportunity measures, and the expectations and aims of that. These 5 dimensions refer to an institutional room of autonomy where the cantons have a possibility to orientate their education and VT policies. And in the time available, we will just focus on the first 2 of them and give an overview of the other. So if we come to the role of the cantonal state, we can see some interesting differences between our 3 cantons. To better visualize these differences, we can place our 3 cantons on a polarity between a limited state intervention and a wide-ranging state intervention. If we consider the discourses in the canton of Zurich, we can see a quite positive evaluation of the VT situation and of the federal framework, as well as of the action of the private actors. This positive evaluation do not push the cantons to intervene more in this domain. The situation is different in Ticino and Geneva. These courses will highlight critical element, negative assessment of the situation of VT in the canton, critical evaluation also of the federal framework, and also they will underline an insufficient commitment from the private actor. All these elements will lead to the exhortation to the cantonal state to intervene more in order to ensure quality VT. All this can be very well illustrated by an analysis of the 3 cantonal implementing laws to the federal law of 63. In this analysis shows how in the canton of Zurich we'll see a limited intervention, narrow application of federal law, and finally few elements of a specific cantonal policies. In Geneva and Ticino, the situation is different. Geneva and Ticino will use this implementing law in order to develop a specific cantonal policy. Cantonal policy based on measures that complement the federal dispositions. For instance, with the creation of tripartite commissions, creation of full-time schools, creation of practical courses, etc., etc. Other interesting differences appear if we consider the second dimension, the role of the school. Also here we can place our canton in a polarity between a conception that considers school, VT school, as a complement to on-the-job training in the context of the dual model, and a conception that considers VT schools as an alternative or even a better alternative to the dual model. The debate around the role of the school is of interest in all the 3 cantons and in Switzerland in general. The theme of the intellectualization of profession, the need to train responsible citizens, and the need for more general education were widely shared. But if we look at Zurich, we saw that the discourse highlighted the need for reform, but only for limited reform. And in any case, this reform should not change too much the dual model. In Geneva and Ticino, the situation is different. We see a really positive evaluation of the role of the school. The VT school should be privileged for pedagogical reason because they are protected place where it's easier to follow the program. And but vocational schools are also a response to the shortage of apprenticeship position in certain domain, and at the same time, school is the best place to teach general knowledge content, the general knowledge content required by the intellectualization of the profession. And in this context, we see the demand for more school in VT programs and a criticism of dual apprenticeship. And these debates will also reflect in concrete measures in our 3 cantons. But in Zurich, we will see few measures at this level. Maybe just the development of a new program, the Berufsmittelschule, Professional Mittelschule. This was a program which provided for a dual apprenticeship, but with an additional day at vocational school, where theoretical and general education contents were taught. In Ticino, we see Geneva and Ticino intervene more extensively in this perspective. First of all, the offer of VT full-time school was significantly augmented, and then Ticino and Geneva try in several ways to reform dual apprenticeship by augmenting the proportion of school teaching, and with an additional alpha day, for instance, with introduction of practical school courses, etc., etc. Interesting differences appear also if we consider the other dimension that we will just present a little bit more quickly. If we take the role of the private actors, we will see how in Zurich the discourse will underline the good job that the private actor made at that time, so that the state could limit its intervention with support measure of the activity of the private actor. If we consider Ticino in Geneva, we see how we see criticism to the commitment of private actor, and the state has to take a more important initiative with incentive measure, for instance, the creation of tripartite commission, or with compensatory measure, for instance, the creation of full-time schools. If we consider now the range of equal opportunity measures, we can also see how in Zurich, even though the theme of democratization of education was present on all the cantons, in Zurich there is no general agreement and no concrete important wide-ranging measure in this domain. Whereas in Ticino and in Geneva, we'll try to reform the VT in order to be more egalitarian in several levels. Maybe the most important measure at this level is the introduction of the comprehensive school at the lower secondary education. Geneva and Ticino introduced this school in the 70s and the 60s with the cycle d'orientation, la scuola media unica, and in Zurich, the Gesamtschule will not implement it at all. If we summarize a little bit what has been said until now with this last dimension of differentiation, we can also see some interesting differences. Of course, the general aims of VT were the same over our 3 cantons. So VT must respond to the demand for skilled labor and participate in a movement to improve the cultural level of the population. But in these 2 aspects acquire different tonalities in our cantons. In Zurich, we will see that the emphasis will be put more on socio-economic goals. VT should ensure the entry in the world of work by meeting the labor needs of companies, and only by ensuring a proper integration into the world of work can VT contribute to the development of the society. In Geneva and in Ticino, VT at the upper secondary level is rather conceived as a time where it's still possible to complete compulsory education, ensuring an adequate base of general knowledge on which to build future specialization. It is also a place where, under the control of the state, equal opportunities and general culture for all young people should be ensured. This element will lead to two different policies. In Zurich, we will see these policies organized around the idea of a limited role of the state, a limited role of school, broad participation of private actors, and limited social measures. And in Ticino, in Geneva, we see the opposite, an extended role of the state, an increased role of schools, and limited involvement of the private actors, and extended social measures. So I come now to the conclusion of this part of the presentation with a synopsis of what we have now presented. Our model enables us to highlight 5-dimensional differentiation between our 3 cantons. It allows us to identify different behavior of these 3 cantons with regard to the role of the state, role of the school, etc. If we now relate this analysis to the development of the dual apprenticeship in the 3 cantons, we can identify a relationship between a certain positioning of the in the 5 dimensions of differentiation and a positive or negative development of the sector. In other words, we can say that a limited role of the state, a limited role of VT school, an extended role of private actors, and limited equal opportunity measure, and the accent put on socioeconomic aims will constitute the background of a positive development of the dual apprenticeship in Zurich. On the contrary, an extended role of the state, an extended role of VT school, a limited role of private actors, an extended equal opportunity measure, and socio-educational aims will constitute the background for a stagnation or even a weakening effect on dual apprenticeship. So it's clear the element that we have here identified must be further refined, in particular by extending our analysis to other cantons. But we think that our analysis show how these 5 dimensions can help us to underline 5 critical issues that are decisive to explain the differences between the cantons. And we can also imagine that these critical issues could be used also for other comparison in international context. So I now give the floor to Philip to the conclusion of our presentation.
Okay, let us now come to some conclusions which are related to the now presented findings by Lorenzo. Thank you, Lorenzo, for presenting this. And more perhaps a general conclusion is that the evolution of this distinctive but nevertheless embedded vocational education in the educational Swiss system is based on several assumptions and on several findings. So one is, as in the beginning already sketched, the laboratory federalism. So comparing and learning from experiences of others is a way how in Switzerland educational actors, but also educational policy has been developed. And often cantons look what other cantons do, and out of this they measure or they modify even some elements of their systems, of their educational and vocational education systems. So related to the findings Lorenzo was presenting, we can perhaps stress some elements like the role of the state. The diversity of regional ways has, sounds perhaps paradoxically, strengthened the role of the cantons and the federal authorities. The federal authorities, which are nowadays have quite a decisive role in defining the main aims of education, of vocational education policy. But also related to the schools, the development of the role of schools or of the educational schemes. we can show, or we can see, that vocational education and training has developed quite distinctively within the cantons and in different cantons differently, but nevertheless has been, or could have been, included in the whole education system and also in the cantonal landscape, so to say. And a very important basis, an element which we didn't stress so much in this presentation, is the national legal framework, which is really a framework, a quite open framework, which allows several cantonal and also different cantonal implementations. And these are based on the federal law and have backed up and even furthered this development of an all-inclusive education system. Now, let me ask more general questions related to the comparative approach within a country. It is an explanatory mode of analysis, showing what different cantons are doing, and under the same independent variables like the economy, political situation, social and pedagogical issues. They lead to a significantly different actions of cantons. Under the same national law, cantonal divergence is possible, and nevertheless, or precisely because of this, enables also innovation. So this is the laboratory element. This is a laboratory which has also some implications for other policymakers and also for the research. In the long run, out of these cantonal divergences, a more unified system emerged. And it shows some factors that doesn't appear often in the international debates. If we have a look on cantonal elements, that they show that the systems have their own, the cantonal vocational education and training system have their own local and regional history. And this history is also embedded in some kind of a learning framework. Federalism is an important element to explain these different developments, and is in a way also for comparative studies a very appealing mode of trying to explain developments. So this brings me to a take-home message. The Swiss vocational education and training model, as part of an educational space, was not designed by a mastermind, but emerged out of interactions between policy actors like cantons, like the federal state, like economic actors, but other private actors as well, step by step. Thus, it is always struggling to solve contrasts between different actors and cantonal interests. Due to such a controversy, such a system remains open for further innovations. Oh, now we come to an end, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.